what was the first time you started investing?
Second grade, I was even into the stock market. And my grandmother put a little bit of money into an E-Trade account, and she didn't give it to me, but she gave me the username and password so I could trade it for her.
What was the turning point and how did you decide that this is something I'd like to do full time?
In my freshman year of college, I got introduced to two of the best short sellers on the planet, Kurthers and Kurthers. If your two early mentors are the best in the world at what they do, you're naturally going to drift in that direction.
How many subscribers do you have on the Bear Cave right now?
For the Bear Cave, there's about 82,000 free readers. There's about 1,000 paid readers. I have a second subscription newsletter, Idea Brunch, which is an interview series. That's about 12,000 free and a few hundred paid.
Wow, jewelry market is going crazy, especially in India, the diamond, the lab-grown diamonds, etc. What was your thesis on this?
You look at any young people, they're proposing with lab-grown rings. They definitely prefer lab-grown rings. And I think this is going to just destroy these diamond retailers. We're seeing natural diamond prices fall 5% every month.
Can you also walk us through your story of how did you end up meeting Bill Ackman?
When I was in high school, I wrote physical letters to all the big investors in the United States. Bill Ackman, Dan Loeb, Jim Simons, Warren Buffett, and the only one to write me back was Bill Ackman.
What did you write in that letter that convinced him to reply to your letter?
Should I pull up the email?
Yeah, sure. That'll be amazing.
Dear Mr. Ackman,
वीडियो देखने से पहले मेरी एक रिक्वेस्ट है आप सबसे। मैं YouTube एनालिटिक्स देख रहा था एंड वहाँ पर देखा कि 82.6% ऑफ माय ऑडियंस हु इज वाचिंग दिस कंटेंट हैज नॉट सब्सक्राइब टू द चैनल। अगर मैंने आपको थोड़ी सी वैल्यू प्रोवाइड की होगी एंड आपको अगर कंटेंट बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है, आई रिक्वेस्ट ऑल ऑफ यू टू प्लीज हिट द सब्सक्राइब बटन सो दैट वी कैन ब्रिंग यू द बेस्ट क्वालिटी ऑफ गेस्ट एंड गिव यू द मैक्सिमम वैल्यू पॉसिबल। थैंक यू सो मच फॉर सब्सक्राइबिंग टू आवर चैनल एंड एंजॉय दिस एंटायर एपिसोड ऑफ कॉन्वर्सेशन विद कुशल।
Let's go back and try to understand your investing journey. So tell me, what was the first time you started investing? What was the first stock you invested in? And did you make money or lose money on that stock?
Thank you. So I've been passionate about the stock market from a really young age. Like second grade, I was even into the stock market. I was so young, I didn't have any money of mine to invest, but my grandmother put a little bit of money into an E-Trade account, and she didn't give it to me, but she gave me the username and password so I could trade it for her. I mean, you're that young, you don't know what you're doing. You just buy stuff you know. So I bought McDonald's, I bought Apple, and I bought this random pharmaceutical company called Offbeat. And even now, I don't think I could tell you what they do. Each of them did really well. Which kind of got me hooked. And when you're young, it's fun to play with real money. So from there, I just continued to invest a little. A bunch of other family members would give me their money to invest. And one of the things that catalyzed my shift towards the short side is I started investing my uncle's money in Valiant Pharmaceuticals. And I don't know if your listenership knows this, but Valiant kind of was a fraud and ended up falling 95% peak to trough. So in high school, I was losing a bunch of family members' money investing in this stock. And that kind of convinced me, I need to do better diligence on this company, taught me what short sellers were, and kind of catalyzed my shift towards the short side and more activist short world.
So then you started investing right from second grade, you're saying?
Yeah.
And then what was the turning point in terms of success when it came, like when you decided that, okay, this is something that I want to do full time? What was the trigger point? And how did you decide that this is something I'd like to do full time?
So, I'm more known for the short seller world, activist short selling and looking into companies and highlighting red flags. And the transition point for me in moving to the short side and doing this deeper diligence on companies really happened my freshman year of college. And my freshman year of college, I got introduced to two of the best short sellers on the planet, one of whom was Cahotz. They used to run $1 billion short only fund. And the second of whom is Jim Kurthers, who did run $1 billion short only fund called Sophos. Mark is now an independent short seller and was an early mentor. And Jim, I interned for him on and off all 4 years of college. And if your two early mentors are the best in the world at what they do, you're naturally going to drift in that direction. So if my two early mentors were microcap people, I would probably be here talking about microcaps. If my two early mentors were in private equity, I might have drifted in that way. But I just by coincidence got introduced to two of the best short sellers. So that's the direction I drifted in. And one of the things that was most compelling about seeing these short sellers is a lot of finances. You're maybe trading stocks, trying to make money, but the world doesn't necessarily change because of you. But I could see with short sellers and after short sellers, you can really impact the world and change things and expose things and highlight wrongdoing. And that's kind of really cool, being able to like make a little dent.
So when you write these short selling reports, do you also like short the stocks yourself, or you just write the reports?
I don't do that at all. So now with the Bear Cave, my model is solely reader subscriptions. I only make money for reader subscriptions. So in order to avoid a conflict or a perceived conflict, I don't trade the stocks I write about. Even though if you look at the history, long-term, the stocks I've written about have underperformed the market by a fairly significant margin. I don't trade them. And that's kind of one of the controversial things in the activist short seller world is, can you trade around reports? There's kind of some regulatory and legal scrutiny around that now.
And how many subscribers do you have on the Bear Cave right now?
For the Bear Cave, there's about 82,000 free readers. Wow. There's about 1,000 paid readers. I have a second subscription newsletter, Idea Brunch, which is an interview series. That's about 12,000 free and a few hundred paid. So those are my two main things.
Wow. So 82,000 subscribers on a newsletter.
Yeah.
That's a lot. So tell me, you said that you met two mentors, Mark Cahotz and Jim Kurthers, at a very early age. And you met them when you were at Stanford.
Yes, freshman year.
At the freshman year. So how did you meet both of them? Can you walk me through the stories of meeting both of them? And then let's deep dive into what did you learn from each one of them?
Absolutely. Let's start with Mark and then go to Jim. Mark was a series of random introductions. So I was in high school and my high school principal introduced me to a hedge fund manager who was near my high school. And I'd walk from my high school to the hedge fund manager's office and I would meet with him. And then his son's roommate was a short seller named Chris Strauss. So then he connects me to his son's roommate. And I'd start talking to this young short seller, Chris Strauss. And when I then moved to college from high school, Chris Strauss was the one who said, you should try to meet Mark Cahotz. And I think he sent me his phone number. And I basically cold called this guy, Mark Cahotz. I vividly remember, I worked up the courage to call him. I call and he's like, what do you want? And I'm like, I'm afraid. And I don't think he believe, hang up, And then I call him the next day and he hangs up. And I call him. And eventually I convinced him to be willing to meet with me. Here's a really successful guy, kind of eccentric. So he says I can go up to meet with him. And he is in about a fairly significant drive from campus. And I didn't have a car. So I take $150 Uber, about a 90-minute Uber up to his chicken farm. He lives on what he calls a chicken farm in Northern California. And I met with him and I just vividly remember, I get out and I know he's like a wealthy, successful guy and he's wearing pink Crocs. It's just the most informally dressed dude. And I'm like, who is this person? And he had just this genuineness about him and realness. And he the first time we met, he was just on the phone, talking to people, talking to reporters. Like the guy is living the most like exciting, eccentric life ever. And I was pitching him on Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals, which was a questionable pharmaceutical company. And he was a little impressed by my research. So that's how I met him. And I think he took me under his wing a little and started showing me the ropes and how to research companies in diligence. Now, Jim Kurthers, who ran $1 billion short-only fund, Sophos, that was a different funny story. To try to get attention as a young person in the industry, I was blogging online anonymously on Seeking Alpha. I had an anonymous blog where I would criticize companies. And this is as a freshman in college. And they were reading my blog, but they didn't know I was so young. And all I said in my bio is I'm in Stanford, California. And they were reading it and my criticisms of this company, Mallinckrodt, and they decided to try to meet with me. And so he arranges a lunch. They're like, hey, we'll meet with you. Like, go grab lunch. And I show up. And he thought I was like an adult, and he was just stunned that I was an 18-year-old college freshman. They did not know I was so young, and I think that kind of impressed him and earned some respect. So then he agreed to let me intern for him on and off all 4 years, and I could not have asked for a better starting internship in the field. So that's big.
So can you walk us through what exactly you learned in those 4 years of on and off internship, and how were like the interactions with him? What exactly is the practical side? What did you learn like on the practical side as compared to the theoretical side?
So on the practical side with Sophos, the thing that surprised me most is how qualitative it was. I think most hedge funds even today are very much modeling and, building earnings estimates. And that happened a little, but that was like less what I was exposed to. And they just focus on having a deep understanding of how companies work. I remember, Jim and literally everyone at the firm, and even the guy running it, would literally cold call people, who are customers and partners of the company, just to try to gauge their understanding and feeling around the products. And I was just, floored. Like, here's a really successful guy, and you'd expect you to have access to all the experts in the world. And they're literally just doing the basic diligence of what do customers think of the company, even the guy at the very top. So that's one thing that really stuck with me. Another thing that I think became a big part of my research process going forward was FOIA, using the Freedom of Information Act to get consumer complaints on companies, because they had an expert they talked to who would do that. And that's kind of what has become a big part of my research process.
What exactly is FOIA? Like, can you explain to the audience?
Absolutely. So in the US, we have a series of laws called the Freedom of Information Act. And the Freedom of Information Act lets any US citizen get records from the government. The idea is to promote transparency, and is traditionally used by journalists to hold government and the government officials accountable. So a common way FOIA is used is journalists will go to regulators and say, I want this official's emails so I can, break a story. But the way I started to use it, which has been key from my first report on care.com all the way to the Bear Cave now, is I go to state regulators and federal regulators and I say, can I have all consumer complaints filed against this specific company? So I use FOIA to get complaints consumers are filing against businesses, which lets me evaluate how they're treating customers, how egregious it is. And I think that has a long-term impact on the business's value.
Oh, got it. Lovely. I think there's a similar act in India called as the Right to Information Act.
Yeah.
And they're like, whatever information you want about anything in general, like people can just file a complaint and then they can just get any information that they want.
Yeah.
So I think that is like similar to what you're seeing in the US.
So a lot of countries have laws like this. The key is, what are the nuances of the laws? Is the law might be one thing, and then how the government responds to it can be very different. So after doing this a long time, I kind of learned who plays games, who's straight. Like, there's an art to it. But yeah.
And tell me one thing. So when you say that these are the qualitative factors that you learned before investing in, before like analyzing stocks. So are you trying to say that quantitative factors are something that you wouldn't look at on the numbers front, like ratios, like profit margins, return on capital employed? That is something which wouldn't be a part of your analysis?
I mean, it's a small part of my analysis. It's kind of, I obviously look at them mainly to see if something's priced in.
Yeah.
So if a company's trading at 4 times earnings, I can't go and say, oh, customers don't like me, because the market clearly is pricing it in, So I need to do, however, if it's trading at 50 times earnings and the market's pricing in a lot of growth, and I could say, hey, if the customers are really upset and there's going to be higher churn and the product isn't that good, then it's going to impact the business. So I look at it a little, but it wouldn't be my core focus. And there's so many people on Wall Street who are just so hyper-focused on the numbers to an almost absurd degree and don't want to look at the basics of a business. To give you an example, sometimes hedge funds will reach out after I write an article on a company, and I wrote about this coupon company, Ibotta, and they have an app that lets you get coupons on various products. And they were asking me about margins and mix shifts and this. And I said, like, have you used the app? Because the first thing I do is I download the app and I go to all the stores and I play with it and see the experience. I'm like, no, we haven't touched the app. I'm like, what? This is the basic thing. There's another company that does ads in mobile games, and all I did for 2 days is I download all their apps and I play the mobile games and I see what the ads are like. And all those other people using fancy terms and margins. I'm like, well, have you played the mobile apps? Have you seen this? So you always want to get in the customer's shoes and see what the product's like versus just a hyper focus on modeling. And that's kind of a core thing of what I do. And there's not always a mismatch, and oftentimes there isn't. But when there is a mismatch between what Wall Street sees in the numbers and what's actually going on, that's when it can be, a big opportunity. And one more thing on it, what I tell people a lot is you could have 2 businesses with identical financials, identical balance sheets, identical growth rates, identical. However, if one delights its customers and the customers are super happy, and the other one is really angry customers and they're ready to leave, those businesses should have completely different values, even if it isn't showing up in the numbers yet. So these qualitative factors can be very important.
So let's deep dive into some case studies and let's try to take some examples of some of the stocks or some of the companies that you recently wrote on the bear cave, and let's try to analyze how do you find red flags in the company, and walk us through your entire process of finding the red flag, and then how do right from how do you find the company, how do you figure out that okay there are some red flags here, and then to the end part which is about writing. So can you just walk us through an entire process using a case study?
Okay, so finding companies can come from a variety of different ways. One way that I'm starting to do now that is more tech focused is every month I ask ChatGPT, please look through all the recent IPOs and SPAC mergers of publicly traded companies and identify me ones that have high levels of consumer complaints. And I'll do that. I'll give it to ChatGPT Deep Research O3, and it'll come back to me 20 minutes later with, hey, here's 10 companies with high levels of consumer complaints. And I'll look at all 10 and maybe decide to pursue 2 more deeply. And if I decide that, hey, this is one I want to dig in more deeply, I'll go look, I'll see what consumers are saying. I'll try to identify a pattern of issues. I'll try to see if competitors have a similar issue. And if it seems like something smells wrong, if there's something the market's not picking up, then I'll go to state regulators and file FOIA complaints, FOIA requests for consumer complaints on the business. An example that I've done recently is KinderCare. So the way I found KinderCare, this big publicly traded daycare company, is asked ChatGPT. It identified it as one of the high-level consumer complaints. I look online. I see on social media and local news reports that there's a lot of complaints about this business and its safety practices and how they're treating children. I see that this is obviously a core issue to the business. I go use FOIA to get hundreds of pages of consumer complaints against the company. I see over and over again really egregious issues, and ultimately become convinced that this is going to become a long-term issue for the company, its brand, its ability to obtain government funds, which is 30% of its business. So I write a report, and that goes a little viral and gets a podcast, and then a lawmaker reaches out and starts to tweet about it, and why should they be getting so much in government funds, and in a way becoming its own catalyst. So that's one example. Another example we could talk about that was early on is Care.com or Chegg. Those are some other ones that have been big in my career.
So can you walk me through both these companies, so Care.com as well as the Chegg? And what was your thesis? How did you find the red flags and what happened exactly?
So Care.com was the first one. This was the rise. So nothing would exist if not for Care.com. So Care.com was $1 billion publicly traded babysitting platform where parents would go to find babysitters and babysitters could advertise their services to parents. And I just finished freshman year of college, and my friend who was a babysitter on the platform said, you should check them out. They seem a little shady. Something seems off. And so I just did a Google search, and I could see in local news stories that a bunch of parents were complaining about the company not doing the background checks right and getting, people with criminal histories on the site. And I decided this is an important issue for the company. Are they doing their background checks? So I decided to test it out myself by applying to be a babysitter on Care.com as Harvey Weinstein, who's in the news for abuse and misconduct allegations. So I used this bad person to apply. I use a photo of Harvey Weinstein. I use the email Harvey the babysitter, gmail.com. I make up a social security number. I make up all this information. And at the end, I consent to their background check. And they say, we'll get back to you in 24 to 48 hours on whether or not you're approved to be a babysitter as this person. And I thought, there's no way I'd get approved. This is obviously a fake account. This is the most easy thing to flag. And 48 hours later, hello, Harvey, I was approved. I was documenting it all. I was applying to babysitting jobs as this fake person, CPR certified, all this crazy stuff. I'm like, you clearly aren't doing the background checks you claim to be doing. So boom, that's how I knew something was wrong. And from there, I wrote up a little report. The stock fell a little. A board member resigned the day after my report. And, I was just kind of happy. Okay, I got a little win. I'm getting good at this. And it would have gone nowhere, except the company decided to call Stanford to complain about me. And a week or two later, I get an email from the dean of students saying, we need to meet with you. And up until this point in my life, I'd never gotten in trouble. I was as straight as air. So I was terrified. I was so nervous. And I didn't know for sure it was Care.com, but it was the only thing I could think of that I did. So I go into this meeting and they say, well, we got a complaint about your Wi-Fi usage. You're impersonating other people, violating your terms of service. I just remember thinking it's the weirdest meeting. And at the end, they said, would you be willing to take your article down? And I said no. And then they said, you can't use Stanford Wi-Fi to do this anymore. And I thought, this doesn't seem right to me. So naturally, as a rebellious guy, I did the exact opposite. I continued to research the company. And on my very last day, sophomore year, I published another report and I got obsessed on them. So this is when I did my first FOIAs. I went to every state for consumer complaints against Care.com. And that's how I learned how each state interprets FOIA differently and which ones have complaints and the likes of that. I went to even police departments to see anytime someone used Care.com in a 911 call. I had all these theories and, really becoming obsessed about the business. So I did this other report and it goes viral and I see all these complaints, not just safety issues, but also billing issues with the company, people saying that they're being overbilled, they can't cancel the subscription, a lot of crazy stuff. And that report goes a little viral. And I was convinced that there was a big issue with this company, particularly around safety. So I cold emailed about 100 journalists. I talk about this all the time with everybody. And ultimately, the Wall Street Journal got involved. There's a front page story about a year after where Care.com babysitters with criminal histories were approved on the site. And in 8 cases or so, kids died in their care. And it was terrible. And the CEO, CFO, general counsel resigned. The stock fell by about half and was ultimately bought out at a lower price than when I started writing about it. And that, gave me a lot of confidence and showed me you can make an impact. And it gave me a lot of credibility that later transferred into people being interested in what I had to say when I was writing The Bear Cave.
Wow. So this is how the journey of Bear Cave started. Like Care.com was the main thing. Like this was the first company you wrote.
It was the first one I wrote about publicly. And this is even before, this is when I was a college student, but it gave me a Twitter following and it made people think, okay, I kind of care what this kid has to say because he was right about one company. What does he want to say about other things? And, so then I interned on and off at Sophos all 4 years. I probably would have worked for them, except the main guy was in the process of retiring or thinking about that. So I couldn't work for them. So I wanted to get a job and I talked to a lot of hedge funds, but I just noticed, especially in the New York crowd, I wasn't as connected with them. And they're very suit and tie and formal and hierarchical. And they very much care about modeling and numbers, which is not my strength. And every place I talked to was like, no, you're going to fit into this mold. And, it wasn't my type of MO. So I, from my past experience, I'm like, I'll just write smart stuff online and someone will want to hire me. So I start this newsletter senior year, February 2020, and the pandemic came and I just grew the newsletter. It was the best time ever to write a newsletter. And ultimately people were willing to pay for it and it just became a full-time job that way, hedge funds paying for it. 5 years later, that's all I still do.
Wow, that's so inspiring. Let's talk about the Chegg. So what happened with them and what was your thesis there?
Absolutely. So Chegg is I like to divide the types of companies I write on into 3 different factors. Companies that are harming their customers. This is more consumer protection. That would be kind of Care.com. Companies, and that's where FOIA is really useful. Companies that are misleading investors or are overly promotional. Kind of stock promotions, if you will. And then more recently, I focus a lot on companies on the wrong end of disruption. So disruption often has some big beneficiaries and investors want to see who's going to be the big beneficiary of AI and so on. But I'm looking at who's going to be the loser, who's going to be hurt by AI. And the first thing that came to mind is Chegg. And when I wrote on them, the stock had fallen from about 90 to 12. And for those who don't know, Chegg at the time was $1 billion homework help company. So students could go to it, pay a monthly subscription to type in their textbook problems and get the answers to the problems and show how to solve it. And this is exactly what AI is great at. This is exactly what ChatGPT is great at. So it was really obvious to me they were doomed. And even though the stock was down a lot, I kind of knew they would be doomed. And sometimes Wall Street's slow to pricing it in. The other thing that I can do that maybe Wall Street's a little slower at is I just go on TikTok. What are students saying about Chegg? What are the customers saying about Chegg? And you go and students hated Chegg. There was this old thing where Chegg would report students who were accused of cheating to the universities and work to basically rat out on their own customers. And they ended that policy, but students hated them forever from that. And it kind of ruined their brand. So tons of students, there was no goodwill for the brand. And even though they were doomed from the competition, if you got no goodwill, you're going to be doomed faster. The other thing I noticed around Chegg is, so they're a monthly subscription business. And obviously, a lot of people were canceling. And in their cancellation flow, they made it really, really difficult to cancel. So you would sign up, and then there's not a button to cancel. You go to a page to cancel. And it's like, are you sure you want to cancel? Are you really sure you want to cancel? How about if you pause it? It was literally 6 different steps just to cancel. And at the end, what they did is, and some businesses do this, they're really sneaky. And it's, we're sorry to see you go. And you think, okay, I cancel. But you need to press one more button to actually cancel. It's like, yes, confirm. So they make you think you canceled, but you haven't actually canceled. I mean, you're a business doing that, you know kind of the end is near. And there's all these other things. But I'm like, okay, so I'm the core customer. I know these students are going to use it. You're so desperate to stem cancellations. You're playing all these sorts of games. This is the stuff that doesn't show up right away in the numbers, but is really telling about the future that I just love to get my hands on. So as soon as I saw that, I knew I needed to write about it. And you don't get brownie points or genius points for saying this company that's down a lot is going to fail, but investors can still make money from it. It's still a valid thesis. And the stock ended up falling 90% plus in the 15 months after my article. So that's one example of just identifying disruption. And, now I try to think who else is going to be AI losers. So maybe call centers are going to be hurt by AI, call center software companies. So it's a big thing I think about who's on the wrong end of disruption.
And when you talk about, let's say, AI disruption, so are there any other examples you think that AI is going to replace these companies, or maybe these are some of the sectors that might get affected because of AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So, another company I wrote on is Teleperformance. They're business process outsourcing and call centers. And this is very relevant for, the Indian audience, because these are big industries in India. And, one thing I've learned is all businesses will say they're going to benefit from AI. Chegg even said AI is going to help us, or we're going to, AI has hallucinations, so we'll make a tool that doesn't hallucinate. No business says AI is going to kill us. So including call centers and business process outsourcers, they all say AI is going to benefit. But whether or not that's actually true is a different thing. And I'm more on the side that I think call centers and business process outsourcers like Teleperformance are going to be hurt, because if you look at the core business, it's, paying people in developing countries, $10 a day to do this really work that oftentimes can be automated. So what I would do is I look at their customer case studies of what they do for their customer. I don't look what they're saying investors, but let me see what the customer relationship looks like. And it's transcribing calls or categorizing data or, approving onboarding forms. And this is just stuff that AI is perfect at. And you're starting to see it in the numbers and starting to see it in some executive resignations. The Teleperformance stock is already down a lot. So I think Teleperformance call centers, this is stuff that's naturally going to be kind of eliminated by AI. And AI may make it more efficient, but it's also going to get rid of a lot of the market. So no extremely differentiated view here. I think it's kind of consensus, but I think it makes sense.
There's another company you wrote on. It's called the Signet Jewelers, and jewelry market is like going crazy, especially in India, by the way, the diamond, the lab-grown diamonds, etc. So what was your thesis on this, and what happened exactly after you wrote that?
So this is a more recent one. So it's yet to see how it'll play out. So Signet is the world's largest retailer of diamond jewelry. They're primarily in the US. They have brands like Zale and Kay and Jared. The kind of typical way they're known is they have these stores in malls and they advertise on TV, and you go there when you want to buy an engagement ring, more middle income consumers. So, relatively cheaper rings. And the issue with them is I think lab-grown diamonds are taking over the market. You look at any young people, they're proposing with lab-grown rings, that they definitely prefer lab-grown rings. And lab-grown rings are now chemically, physically, optically identical to natural diamonds. In fact, they're so good that even the GIA can be fooled. And jewelers cannot tell the difference, even with the jeweler scope, cannot tell the difference between lab-grown and natural. They are identical now, and lab-grown are so much cheaper. And I think this is going to just destroy these diamond retailers for several reasons. One, as lab-grown proliferates, it's driving down the price of both lab-grown, and we're seeing natural diamond prices fall 5% every month, which is a big issue. And if diamond prices are falling so much, how can you earn money as a diamond retailer? If diamond prices fall 80% over the next year, you're going to be doomed. They have about $2 billion of inventory. All that inventory is going to be worth a lot less. We know from historical precedent that when these things kind of become commodified at a cheap level, the jewelry businesses get destroyed. So the example I kind of give with lab-grown diamonds is the most valuable metal in the late 1800s was aluminum. People didn't realize this, but the top of the Washington Monument is actually 100 ounces of aluminum because that was seen as the most valuable metal in the world because it was very tough to get in its natural pure form. But then we found a way to smelt it, and it lost 99.9% of its value in a few decades. Women used to wear aluminum jewelry, believe it or not. That was what the people would use, but now no more. And I think diamonds are going to be very much the same way. And now that you have lab grown, it's going to drive the price down. Everybody can have big, beautiful diamonds, and then nobody will want them. And it's just going to be so commoditized. And the most disturbing thing to me is the management has these very, to me, incorrect responses to this threat of lab-grown diamonds. You got to be willing to pivot. You got to be willing to change. And they say, we're going to retrain our staff to teach customers the benefit of natural diamonds. We're going to add warnings on our receipts telling them that lab-grown value diamonds aren't going to hold up. What they don't say is lab-grown values are going down, but natural diamond values are going down too. Everybody is going to be screwed. It's this kind of complete mismatch. So I'm very confident we're going to see diamond prices, both natural and lab-grown, plummet in the future. And if historical precedent is true, once diamond prices fall 90% plus, nobody's going to care that much about diamond jewelry. And if you're a Signet and you can make a lot of money selling diamond engagement rings now and high margins selling lab-grown now, just as the prices come down, it destroys your business model. And it's so wacky to me that like the pushbacks can be, oh, women prefer natural diamonds, but that's not true. If you talk to women, you look what they say online, they're perfectly happy to get a more beautiful, bigger diamond that's a lot cheaper and they can spend more on a honeymoon. They say lab-grown has higher margins, and that's true, but the prices are coming down so fast, it's not going to last. You say you're going to re-educate your store people, but this is temporary fixes for a long-term issue. So I really like this thesis of lab-grown diamonds changing the diamond industry. I would short diamonds if I could.
But tell me one thing. So this thesis which you're saying, it's an industry-wide phenomenon, right? It's not a company-specific phenomenon, as far as I understand.
Yes.
So why only, let's say, Signet Jewelers, and what about the other companies which are there in the industry?
So there's not really a pure play as much as Signet. If there were other companies, I would say bet against them too. But Signet is the only company that, their whole thing is diamond jewelry.
Okay.
So, and there's not an easy way to bet against diamond prices. However, I did write an article where I try to say, other than Signet, what could he bet against? There's a company, Compass Diversified. They have a business, Lugano Diamonds, that's more on the high end, but that's a little more protected, and that's not the entirety of their business. Signet is more of a pure play. If you want to get creative, there's a country, Botswana, and I think 80% of their exports is diamonds. So that country is, potentially going to bet against. But there's not really many pure plays. And then there's some micro cap diamond miners that are going to be hurt, but those are so small, they're irrelevant. So I would bet against anything in the diamond industry, but Signet is the pure play.
Got it. Fair. And can you give an example of a company where you wrote something about them, but it did not go as per your thesis? Because all the companies that we discussed like these went as per your thesis and it went down. But has there been an example where you wrote, but still the stock went up, and what happened?
There's many examples. I've written on about 100 companies now. So of course you're going to get some that blow up in your face. The most painful has been Palantir. So I only wrote on them once. This isn't a long-term thesis. I just write these articles and sometimes move on. And that stock is up over 500% since I've written on them. So talk about something embarrassing. And, the big thing with Palantir is they're a little bit of a black box, and depending on who you ask and what they exactly do, you're going to get slightly different answers. They're part consultancy, part AI platform. And, I talked to several people in the industry, and they based on that, I kind of reached the conclusion that Palantir was overhyped, that their AI capabilities weren't that good, that it's a black box of not that much substance there. They were doing a bunch of weird shenanigans to inflate revenue by doing deals with SPAC mergers that made me really suspicious. I heard from one or two customers they weren't that good. So even though I didn't understand the core technology that much. I just said, this is a black box, and I don't think there's a ton of value there. And I think elements of it could have been still true to this day. The inappropriate deals with SPAC mergers to inflate revenue, that wasn't right. I think it is true that, they have more of a kind of consultancy model than maybe the market gives them credit for, but they definitely hit a turning point, and the stock is up 500% plus, and they think some bigger deals. So that's been a particularly painful one. I really hate having these situations where I write on it and it explodes. And thankfully, there haven't been too many like that. And I think my biggest takeaway is I do best with ideas that completely originate with me and my own idea generation process. And when the genesis is with somebody else and I'm relying on someone else, then I can screw up. And that was literally a friend saying, you really should look into them. And, that was when I kind of blew up in my face.
So what exactly does Palantir do? Like you said, it's a part AI, part consultancy company. What's their business model exactly?
Well, you need to ask them that. But what they do is they work with these really large corporations and kind of are like an outsourced data science team. So as I aim work with governments, so they'll go in and they'll implement technology solutions to, modernize their businesses. So a bank might use, but they'll get very deep into the customer relationship. So they'll sign a consulting agreement with the JP Morgan Chase. They'll deploy several engineers to go meet with the team at JP Morgan Chase and see what they need in terms of data science capabilities and managing their data. They're going to implement custom technology solutions to help them better use their data. And the big thing is, do you value it like a consulting company, which typically gets relatively low multiples, or do you value it like an AI and data platform, which gets much higher multiples? And my view after talking to some people in the industry is it's more of a consulting company, and this is too much hype, and there's not much there. And I think they've shown that my view is kind of wrong. And I think, what I missed is a lot of customers actually love this forward deployed engineer getting, a more granular understanding of the company's issues. And there is something more of a platform company there than just like consulting based businesses.
Got it. And can you also walk us through your story of how did you end up meeting Bill Ackman? What happened exactly there, and what did you learn from him?
Yes, I met a lot of like really interesting people in the business, and like you and some of your friends, I was big in reaching out to people when I was young. So when I was in high school, I wrote physical letters to all the big investors in the United States. Bill Ackman, Dan Loeb, just anybody who's in the news, like Jim Simons, Warren Buffett, everybody, I wrote letters to them. And the only one to write me back was Bill Ackman. And he sent this handwritten note with a list of 10 books I should read. And the note said, it was short. And I asked him for advice, and he said, my best advice is you will learn by doing. So just try to do things, and that's how you'll learn. And that was great advice. And so I got this letter, I framed it, and it made a big impact for me as a high schooler. And then in college, as I was getting more into the short side, I was very closely following his Herbalife saga. I was obsessed with Herbalife and all the people doing research on Herbalife. And I cold emailed him when I was in New York. And I remember I was smart with the cold email where I made the subject line fan mail, because I figured, you got to flatter, like you get 100 cold emails, you're always going to open the one that says fan mail. And he agreed to meet with me, and I got to meet with him for 30 minutes in his office. And I brought the letter he had sent me so many years ago. And I asked him just a bunch of questions, and I pitched him on a short thesis or two. And it was really good. And I was really, I wanted to ask him questions and learn, but I was also trying to convince him to give me an internship, which, didn't end up happening. But he was very nice, very smart. I remember he wanted to get through a lot of questions quickly. Like sometimes you meet with somebody and they just want to talk for an hour, ask them questions and they talk. He was more interested in the questions and, seeing all the things I'd ask him. And he expressed, some pain from the short selling stuff and said he wouldn't do that in the future because Herbalife was so painful and caused distraction. But, just the fact that he took the time to respond to my letter in high school has given me a very big soft spot.
Do you remember the 10 books that he had mentioned, or some of them?
I tweeted it out. It was an old school list. It was, I think, One Up on Wall Street. There's a Peter Lynch book. The book about MBIA, Confidence Game about him, I'm pretty sure was on the list. Intelligent Investor was on the list. There's the tweet that we'll like include the link to, but it was a very old school list.
And what did you write in that letter that convinced him to, let's say, reply to your letter back? What did you write exactly?
I think I just said, I'm a high schooler, really passionate about investing. What should I do to accelerate my career? And he said, I would read all these 10 books, and then you need to start investing because you will learn by doing. And that's kind of a philosophy that I even, had a little bit with the Bear Cave, is you learn when you're actively looking into these companies and writing and getting feedback and meeting people. So you will learn by doing is a great piece of advice. And I think the other piece of advice, to allude to something you said earlier, what I learned at Sophos and Jim Kurthers, is I remember I asked Jim, what's your best piece of advice? And he said, a little bit of initiative goes such a long way in life. And that's something I've learned, is just cold emailing, just taking a little bit of initiative, going off the beaten path a little, just taking an extra step goes a super long way in life.
And when you wrote that cold email, so the subject line was fan mail.
Yeah.
And what was the cold email? Like, why do you think he responded to your, subject line was one reason, but what did you write exactly in that cold
Should
email?
I follow up the email?
Yeah, sure. That'll be amazing. That'll be super interesting.
Dear Mr. Ackman, I'm a Stanford junior, very passionate about short selling and a big fan of yours. I appreciate your fight on Herbalife front and how it exposed wrongdoing to the benefit of society. I appreciate how your activism at companies like Canadian Pacific benefited those beyond your firm. If you have any time in your busy schedule, I'd love to meet and receive feedback on a few ideas I'm working on. I previously interned at SEC, Sophos, and published short ideas online. I'm currently living in New York as part of a college program. I would be happy to meet whenever and wherever convenient for you. Please let me know if you're available.
Oh.
And the response was, here's my secretary, she'll set something up. So I think the key for cold emails, though, is you got to keep it brief. Yeah. You got to keep it clear, and you want to do something to differentiate yourself. So any really successful person gets, 100 cold emails. So if you do linking to a write-up you did, or including a write-up, just something that shows you've done an extra step is good. I've also, for really people I want to meet, I like saying I'll meet wherever and whenever convenient for you. Because sometimes these guys, they get something, and then the guy's like, well, this is the 1 hour that works for me. And then it becomes a whole scheduling thing. I've literally had people who, say, oh, I'd be open to meeting with you, or, when do you want to meet? And I'll say, tomorrow, all day I'm free. And I'm not free. I just cancel whatever I have. But if you do that, you try to get it as soon as possible, that dramatically increases the chances you'll, get what you.
Have you met Warren Buffett?
No, I haven't. So I think we talked about this. I sent so many letters to Warren Buffett as a high school student that they literally, I think, got concerned. So they sent me an email back and they said, do not show up here. He won't meet with you. I think they thought I was like stalkerish. So then I stopped, doing that. But yeah, I obviously know more people in the short world than the long side, but just, meeting some of these people and that's another thing I say, especially for younger people and when you're a student, is you have this huge opportunity to meet people, because as soon as you're more of an adult and you graduate, you lose that innocence and purity, and people are less willing to give you a lifeline and help you out. But when you're super young, people are just love helping students, especially from their alma mater. So the other thing I did in college, especially when I was in New York for a quarter, is I'd just look at the big investment firms. I'd see whoever went to my college and I'd cold email them, because people love to help people from their university. Not necessarily it's rational, but just what people do. So I was very good at I think when I was in New York, I would send 100 cold emails a week. And the response rate might be 10%, and 5 of those meet. But me and a friend, we do that just in our respective industries. There's so many cold emails as a college student, and it really paid off big time for us.
Wow, that's a lot of cold emails, 100 a week.
But think about it. So, most people aren't going to respond, right? And we even got it down to a science where I figured out, I think it's best to send them in the afternoon. And so there was this study done on judges, and it turns out the judges give more lenient sentences after the lunch break, because you're cranky at 11 a.m. when you're waiting for lunch, but you're happier after you've gotten lunch and belly filled, and that's when you're happiest. So you always want to send the cold email in the afternoon, get it to them at 1 p.m. and not 11 a.m. So, and I kind of figured that Sundays were best, because Sundays were when people were less busy. And, when you're super busy during the week, you're like, I don't have time for this, tweet. But when it's a Sunday, you're with your family, you're happier, feeling like a great person. So Sunday afternoons, I would either send all the emails or schedule them all out with a friend to go out then to all the people. And the response rate might be 10, 20%. And then oftentimes people will respond and say, I'm busy or I appreciate it. But, then a lot of people, really successful people, would be willing to meet with me as a student. And I'd go in and I'd always do a lot of research on their backgrounds, try to show I did work and to have like personalized questions. And I'd always go in with an idea to pitch. And sometimes they wouldn't be interested in it. And obviously, if I'm just a student, I'm probably not going to wow them with the research abilities. But that would really help. And I think one story that I haven't told before that is funny and shows the persistence here is there was one fund near my college campus who just would never respond to my emails. They would never, they get back to me. And they normally if people said, no, I can't meet with you, I'd respect it. For this fund, they just never responded ever. So I really wanted to meet with them. Everyone said you got to meet with them. So I took just randomly the Caltrain up to their offices. And this is, I think, as a freshman. So I was 18. And I said, I'm just going to show up randomly and see if they'll meet with me. And I go to the lobby at this big building, the hedge funds on whatever, the penthouse floor. And I say, can I go meet with this hedge fund? I'm a young guy. I want to talk to them. And the guy says, do you have a meeting? I say, no. He's like, absolutely not. You can't go in without entry at all. And 99% of students will be like, okay, I shot my shot. I left. But I still haven't gotten an official no. So I go and I get on LinkedIn and I just start messaging people at the hedge fund. I'm a freshman in college. I'm passionate about this. I'm in your lobby right now. Can you please let me come up? And I want to pitch you an idea. And eventually somebody called down and said, okay, let him up. So I go up to this very respected hedge fund and I pitch them a bunch of ideas. And they tell me after, we figured you are either here to rob us or you're going to be a special guy. And then we decided to let you meet. And I think some of the people at that firm still read the bear cave to this day.
Oh, wow.
So you can't do that once you graduate. It's weird to just show up randomly and be really persistent. But as a college student, you have this like special innocence and ability to really kind of will things. So that's one of the things that's served me well in my career is just being so social as a young guy.
I think, being persistent is very underrated. And I feel like persistence is a quality or that is something which differentiates a successful person from another one.
Yeah.
And I still remember, so I'll share one story with you. So I wanted to interview the Dean of Harvard Business School, Dr. Shrikant Datar. And he's an Indian chartered accountant. So I've also studied chartered accountancy from India. So I sent him a cold email in July 2021.
Yeah.
That was the first cold email. I got a reply that he's occupied because of the COVID pandemic and he'll do it at a later year of the deanship. I sent another email in January 2022, which is almost 6 months down the line.
Yeah.
And I get a reply that he's not going to do it now because he's occupied with the deanship. And I was very sad because he had said yes earlier and now he's saying no.
Yeah.
In April 2023, which is like 1 year, 4 months afterwards, I sent another cold email just to try my luck that, okay, whether he'll be okay or not. Then I sent another email that, sir, it's been 2 years. I've been following up and I really want to do a podcast with you. Can you give me like a half an hour slot? I'd just love to talk about your journey and discuss about how Harvard is helping students in order to accelerate in their career, etc. I get a reply from his secretary 2 days after my email stating that he is okay to do it on 17th of July 2023, which was almost 3 months later. And then I get a final interview, final podcast in July 2023, which was almost 2 years afterwards, after my first cold email. So he really liked the persistence, I think. And it took me 2 years to host the Dean of Harvard Business School.
I have so many stories like that where I've heard from other people. It's just following up. Oftentimes, if I cold email people and don't get a response, when I was a college student, I'd follow up in 2 weeks. Now I have a newsletter interview series written called Idea Brunch, where I interview up and coming great investment managers, written interviews. So I'm always looking, and I always look for people who haven't been interviewed before. And people who haven't been interviewed before are tough to get the interview written. So I reach out to them. And sometimes I won't get a response. Very rarely people will say no, but they often say I'm busy, so follow up in a year. And then I follow up in a year and they say I'm still busy, but follow up. And there's been people I follow up just every 6 months for 2 years, and then they eventually agree to do it. And then boom, it's one of the best interviews ever. So just the ability to follow up, and I kind of have it down to a science. Like, these are the people I think are really great, and I'm just going to follow up every 6 months until they either do it or they say no. It really differentiates you, because a lot of really successful people, they'll get a lot of inbound interest. But if you can, show you're a little different and have a polite persistence, and don't get to a harassing level and accept no if they just ask not to be contacted again, but polite persistence and initiative, huge differentiating factors.
And do you have any productivity hacks that you follow on a regular basis, which helps you to keep more disciplined and which helps you to keep more sincere about the work that you're doing? Like maybe some hacks that you use.
I think the biggest thing now in terms of productivity hacks is AI. I mean, people who can use ChatGPT or other AI tools effectively, it's a game changer. So to what I said before is literally just every month I'm asking ChatGPT deep research, look through all the IPOs and SPAC mergers and find me ones with high levels of consumer complaints. So in a way, I got eyes on every company going public on a fairly active basis. And that's something you can't replicate as a human. So, I've really just by using it a lot and interacting with the tool, I think people who get really good at using ChatGPT or similar tools are just going to be so much more productive than people who aren't native with it. So just by far and away, in terms of being future focused and more productive, finding ways to use ChatGPT effectively, I think or AI tools effectively is going to be a huge thing.
Are you using any other AI tools for your research apart from ChatGPT?
No, it's really ChatGPT deep research. I'm trying to build out my own software tools to help do research better. But in terms of AI tools, ChatGPT is what it is.
So how are you then going to differentiate from, let's say, ChatGPT or other software tools? What do you have in your mind?
So in terms of tools that I'm building myself to help, do research better is I think there's a big opportunity to build these niche financial software tools to highlight red flags at companies. So to give one example of a website I built, it's FOIAsearch.com, which lets investors search through the SEC's FOIA logs. So the SEC gets thousands of FOIA requests every year. And then they respond to certain requests with something called a B7A exemption, which they use when they say we're investigating a company and we don't want to release records on it. So these requests and these exemptions have a lot of value. And the SEC releases these files with all the requests every month, but they're in this obscure website that no one goes to, and they're difficult to search through. So if I want to search through the last years of requests, I need to download all 24 files and control each one. So I built a simple website, FOIAsearch.com, that lets you search through all them in a single search and lets you get email alerts when new keywords are used in filings. So you can type in a company name and I can see whether there's a likely SEC investigation into that company. I can even type in a name like the Wall Street Journal or a news publication and see all the requests reporters are filing on companies. So I can kind of get a sense of what reporters are working on before they publish their story. It's a leading indicator there. So that's like one really niche tool that nobody's built, but is extremely high value and high signal in terms of doing research. Another website that I built and people are starting to look at is commentlettersearch.com. So comment letters are informal correspondence between the SEC and public companies. You can find them on Edgar by searching CRORES, but comment letters are these really rich documents that many investors don't look at and don't know how to interpret. And oftentimes there's a lot of correspondence between the SEC and a company, and 90% of it is kind of meaningless. So it doesn't carry much value. And my tool, commentlettersearch.com, makes it easy, one, to see all the comment letters between the SEC and a company and highlights the high risk one. One of the basic things for comment letters is long letters tend to be more severe, where you're asking a lot of questions of the company. Why did you do this and this and this and omit this and that? Then those letters tend to be more severe. So my tool makes it really easy to filter letters by length, by market cap of the company, by keywords, and now my own proprietary filters where you can go to the website and just say, hey, I want all letters that Edwin, based on his own proprietary searches, is identifying as high risk. So I'm kind of automating the work that I would kind of do myself. And that leads to a lot of insights. And the last tool I want to mention is called 8ksearch.com. And all these are free right now. And that lets you search all 8K filings, which are like news filings by public companies, down to the minute they were filed. You can see the exact minute companies upload filings. And the idea is companies often try to bury bad news at inconvenient times. So it's a joke in the US markets that companies always disclose bad news Friday after the market closes, when everybody's going home and they're not going to be at their computers Friday after the market closes. Right now, there's not an easy way to search like, hey, what are all companies above $500 million market cap that are doing 8Ks from 4 to 6 p.m. on a Friday? My tool makes it easy to do that. You can even search by, keywords like resignation. I can see every company that used the word resignation effective immediately after 4 p.m. on a Friday. So it kind of like illuminates the information companies are trying to conceal. And you can even do it for 3-day weekends or, trading holidays, other stuff like that. So these really simple tools I can use for my own idea generation or research process. It can give me an edge, but can give anybody else who uses them an edge. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I think there's a big opportunity to build out this suite of kind of niche software tools. And one thing I will add is the market for these tools, is huge, but the existing people kind of are terrible. There's comment letter search functionality, but it's $10,000 a plus, per year. And that's very ugly, these other competitors, and they don't even think about it intuitively like they should. So I think there's a big opportunity to build out financial software. And I want to use the money from my newsletters to build out these tools so any investor can better diligence companies.
And you also plan to, let's say, then launch a subscription model with these tools, is what I assume, right?
Yeah, so long term, I'm not 100% sure. So when it comes to building software, my first idea is I want just to build stuff that is useful that people use. So release it for free, get feedback, get some sort of traction. Then I'm either going to do one of the two things, which is I'm either going to say, hey, all paid readers to my newsletter have access to these tools. So if you want access, you need to subscribe to my publication. So I'll bundle it, or I'll launch it as a standalone product. Hey, pay $1,000 a year and you can have access to all these tools, and my existing readers can get it for free, or for free for 5 years or something. But I think there's a big market for these tools, and I'm kind of surprised that the incumbents, they might have something around this, but not the way I would design it.
What would be the difference between what you are doing versus what Hindenburg was doing? Like, both of the similarities is that short selling, like both of you are trying to do short selling, in the sense covering companies which you want to short. But one difference which I see is that you don't yourself short them. Hindenburg used to short themselves. Are there any other differences?
Yeah, so there's several differences between me and an activist short seller such as a Hindenburg Research. The first is I'm not trading it. I'm not taking a financial stake. I only make money from reader subscriptions. Activist short sellers are trading it. And, I can't speak to any specific person's trading methodology, but in general, the way activist short sellers do is they might trade the stock with their own capital. They might short the company they're betting against, but oftentimes they use balance sheet partners. And this is true of Hindenburg as well as several other activist short sellers, which is when they publish on a company, they really think it's going to go down. So they'll use somebody, oftentimes outside the US, to take a big position against the stock and typically cover shortly after publication so they can make money and then share the profit. So you use a balance sheet partner to trade around the reports and split some of the profits, like 70-30, so the activist short seller can get money from this other person trading around the report. So not just they're trading around it, they use balance sheet partners to trade around it. And that's more or less an industry standard practice. The other big differentiator between me and activist short sellers such as a Hindenburg Research is I tend to be very document-based. So I'm reading SEC filings, I'm reading lawsuits, I'm obtaining information through Freedom of Information Act requests. I'm really just seeing what's on the public domain and online, while activist short sellers, and especially Hindenburg, they might be document-based. They also tend to be very source-based. So you look at some of these activist short sellers and it's, we talk to 20 people in the industry. We talk to former employees, former contractors, whoever. And so that's one big difference between me and them. Part of the reason I don't talk to sources is I think it raises the legal and regulatory risk, especially around, are you getting material non-public information? I don't feel comfortable typically paying for information, but something you see with activist short sellers, and especially at Hindenburg Research, is they can pay a lot of money to get people to give them information. So that's one big difference. And that's not really talked about. But in one case, a former contractor for a public company, I believe, got $600,000 for sharing information. And that's kind of evolving in this space. So that's a big difference. And I think the last thing I would say as a differentiating factor is, for me, I try to do everything as I can, as like organically and independently as possible. I do get reader tips and people messaging me, but I really kind of, especially now, try to stand alone in how I think and generate ideas. And I think not for all, but for some activist short sellers, and there's nothing wrong with this, is it's becoming more and more tip-based, where the genesis of an idea tends to be a tip rather than, more organic. So those are some of the differences. But we'll say activist short sellers in general have done a lot to expose fraud. And I think oftentimes another source of income for activist short sellers is working with regulators to get whistleblower awards. And that's something that isn't as talked about, but is another like lucrative path in which you can, get whistleblower awards or finance whistleblower awards as an income stream. So even though it's similar spirit, exposing misconduct, the methods can be quite different.
And what are your thoughts on the entire Adani-Hindenburg thing that happened? Did you follow that closely?
I didn't follow it super closely. I obviously read it when it came out. It got a lot of attention. First blush, probably mixed bag. It had a big impact on the stock. And, some of the stocks in the Adani enterprise have recovered. Some of them have continued to fall. I think the report called it the largest corporate con. And, based on how it's traded since then, maybe that was a little bit of an extreme way of putting it. As you know, I was actually in India a few months ago, and I asked a lot of people, obviously, about Adani and what they thought. And I kind of changed my views just being in India, just seeing how much the people there respected Adani, and how just, my perception of it was, this is all smoke and mirrors. And but then going to India, it's like, no, this is actually really substantive. They have a huge physical footprint in the country. They are not just flimsy little stock promotion that's been promoted out of control. There's a lot of substance to it. So I think we'll see, but just being in the country and seeing how a lot of you and the respective business people talk about it really kind of changed my views.
So is there any Indian company that you're going to cover in your newsletter?
So I typically stay in the US markets for several reasons. One, the readership of my newsletter typically cares more about US companies. So that's just, what's more active. Counterintuitively, a lot of what I do is I don't want to get sued. And when you write about international companies, that's more likely to be litigated than domestic companies, and smaller companies are more likely to sue you than larger companies. Partly because in the US, it's a very accepted practice to criticize those in power and to criticize large public companies and have this freedom of speech. And I don't think that's as respected, or the social norms aren't there around other countries. So, and then also, I think there's a lot of short selling restrictions in other countries, and there's not as much of maybe a financial incentive to root it out. Like I think in Adani's case, they were, using a partner to short the bonds and the credit, and it was, kind of odd, or like creating ETFs. It was different, So, I typically stick to US companies. And also I think greatest strength is Freedom of Information Act. And that's like really US based.
And when you were in India, so who were some of the interesting people you met? And what did you observe about the Indian customers, or some insights from your trip to India?
So I really enjoyed my trip to India. It was part of a group, and we met with so many amazing people, the commerce minister, the telecommunications minister. The favorite person who we met briefly who spoke to us as a group was the Honorable Dhananjay Chandrachud, the former justice. He was incredible. I mean, you could just sense the integrity and the smartness. And we were asking him about specific cases, and he was recalling every minute detail. And I'd done a lot of research, in advance. And he was just knowing, I'd researched the cases the night before, and he knew every detail like possible. Years later, I was just blown away by him. Meeting with some of the leadership in India, and for them to talk to kind of a group of American entrepreneurs, and really, they were all very competent. They were all on time for the meetings. They're all gracious hosts, and they all just consistently hammered home the point of caring about India. India surprised me in how advanced it was, even more so than the US. You guys obviously know this, but it's like all the payments can be done over a phone. Everything tech-wise is so far advanced. I think it's been a big priority of Modi to get everybody to have bank accounts so you can do direct payments directly to them. I was really surprised by how, advanced that was on that front. So the technological advancement, the youth of the country, and that's something all the speakers would talk about, is India is not just one of the most populated, it's one of the youngest growing countries. So I left very optimistic about the future of India.
And how was your interaction with Mr. Piyush Goyal, the Commerce Minister?
So he was... So I want to be clear, I had limited direct interaction. We were a group of 30 and they came and they spoke. And I did not ask him a question, but a bunch of people in the groups did. And just every answer he kind of hammered home. He really made clear they want investment in the country. They want to help people who want to build in the country to cut through red tape and reduce the regulations so they can get foreign investment. He showed up on time. The meeting ended exactly on time. He had his staff entirely available. And you know what was such a shame is I normally like to prepare a ton for meetings. However, I was on a flight from JFK to New Delhi, and my plane, we turn around midway in the air when we're about to enter India airspace, and we divert to Rome, and we have fighter jets escorting us. And it turns out that there was a bomb threat on the plane that I was going to when I was going to meet all these guys. So I land in Rome, we got, patted down. It was the craziest flight experience of my life. And I end up because I want to meet all these guys, I take an overnight flight, and I end up getting there, I get 2 hours of sleep. I wasn't able to do all the research I could. So I missed the opportunity to do as much prep work as I wanted. But all of them were very, very great at articulating the vision for India, the youth, the development. They had all the talking points memorized. The country with the most young people, with a growing number of airports, with the best technology, with the most foreign investment. They really wanted foreign investment. I was very, very impressed by all these people.
And did you also get a chance to, let's say, talk to some maybe retail individuals or just some customers, or maybe some people who you were evaluating any companies on, apart from the ministers? You get time to spend with local people there?
A little bit. Honestly, it wasn't as much as I had hoped, because it was very kind of, we were just going from one location to another. I stayed at a nice hotel. I need to go back to India so I can get more of the local experience. But, it was definitely, a lot of people, very crowded, very social. Indians love to talk to anybody. I got mistaken for Indian, I think, by their choice. But oftentimes I notice even on planes is people like to be quiet, AirPods in, but everybody wanted to talk and, was very friendly.
Yeah, I think, that's very true, because it's a lot of welcoming culture there. Whoever is coming there, it's the hosts are quite gracious and want to just show around India, what's happening, what's not. That's the culture which has been built.
Yes, and I even remember the telecommunications minister. He had us all introduce ourselves, and he was asking questions of us. And I thought, how rare is that you can find someone who is so successful, and they're one of the most successful people in the country, and they're having an interest in you and wanting to talk to you and hear your story and about the problems you have in your. I was very impressed by all of that.
Also, if you can just talk about your Stanford days as well. What was the most interesting class, or who was the most interesting professor in your 4 years of Stanford journey, and what did you learn from that professor?
So kind of consistent with my whole life approach is my greatest learning and greatest value came from off the beaten path stuff. So not the classes I would take as my core undergraduate. Those were fine. But those weren't what provided me the most value. The most value I got in my college experience were two things that most students didn't really pursue. One was sitting in on graduate school of business classes. So Stanford has a business school, and it's for business school students, but I kind of learned you could just show up and ask the professor if you could sit in, and oftentimes they were okay with that. So I was going to all these classes, and I would intentionally just pick the one that were lecture series, because I don't want to do the homework of business school. I just want to hear great people talk. So I found all the graduate school business classes where they just get the speakers, and let me in on a secret, the business school gets much better speakers than the undergraduates. And I would go to all these classes and I would just hear these people speak. And I remember one time, I think when you're a college student, you can be a little naive. I show up to this business school class, which is obviously paying business school students. And none of them were asking questions for some reason. So I just started asking questions as the undergraduate, and the teacher pulled me aside and they're like, Edwin, you can sit in the class, but you can't talk. You can't be asking questions. So that was one thing that provided me a lot of value in college. And now the other thing that was really good is I got this great mentor, John Chauvin, who was one of the professors there. And almost every week I would meet with him. And, it started off more mutual, where he would ask me questions about my academic experience and give me advice and whatever. And then I would ask him questions, but quickly it just became a learning thing where I would just ask questions about life, about business, or whatever. And he would just open up, and he's a very successful person. And what I've learned is a lot of times people love to talk and they love to mentor. And, even though I sometimes would even go, normally in the beginning, I do a lot of research and think, what do I want to ask the guy? But later it would just be like, hear them talk and hear what they have to say. And, I've had that at a lot of stages in my life in which you just find somebody really successful and you just, and they want to mentor. So you meet with them every month, every few weeks, and they just love to talk and share, and you learn.
And who are some of the people you really want to meet in the future? You have not been able to get a meeting with them, but these are 3-4 people you would like to meet in the future.
I think since I've graduated college, I've almost shifted a little bit. And this is going to sound odd, and I don't want it to sound arrogant in saying this. But now that I'm, I think, a little older and that youthful innocence wears off a little, for me, it's more, I want to become such an attractive, useful, interesting person that people want to reach out to me, or it would be more mutual. So I don't really think of who can I cold email to get 30 minutes of their time to meet. I more think of how can I be of value, just become a useful person, and people want to network with you. Because once you get older, there needs to be, I think, a little bit of a mutual benefit. So one way I do that is with Idea Brunch, this newsletter interview series, where I joke that now if I reach out to successful investors and I said, hey, I'm a youngish guy, can you get on the phone and talk to me for 30 minutes so I can ask you questions? They'll say, I'm busy, I won't, or whatever, I'm busy. But if I say, hey, can I interview you for my newsletter interview series? I'll go out to a bunch of people. Can I ask you the same questions? They'll say, yes, I'm honored. Thank you so much. And I'll ask all the questions I want to ask, and I'll get the responses, but now it's a mutual benefit. And I'm sure you see the same thing with the podcast is people will, when there's some benefit for them, that it's much more open to it. So that's how it's evolved over time.
I think I completely resonate with this. And in fact, I also feel that after a point in time, you have to figure out a way to be useful to people. And then there's a phenomenon or phase where you also feel that, okay, now you should be of value to people, and people can also reach out. You can also reach out to them. And there should be a mutual consideration, which is that it should not be okay, I want to reach out to you. I want a 10 minutes meeting from you. And then it goes away. Those are very transactional, or those are very superficial meetings where you meet a person for 10-15 minutes, but you don't end up keeping in touch with them. I don't know then how it helps ultimately.
Yeah, it's best when it's kind of organic and unplanned. I saw this beautiful, I think, note from Steve Jobs, which is you never know how you're going to meet the people that'll change your life. So when you're young, as a college student, absolutely reach out to everyone. Just think of the people you want to meet, think of the questions. But once you get old, it's more about I like this quote. You want to, and somebody else, I thought of this, I think Sahil Bloom, and he said, you want to increase your luck surface area in life. So I think more about how can I increase my luck surface area? So, what does that mean? How do you get lucky? How do you meet people? If you just stay in your room and, you maybe go to an event once in a while, that doesn't really do much. But writing online is a great way to increase your luck surface area. Having a professional online media or Twitter account is a great way to increase your luck surface area. Doing a podcast or newsletter interview series is a great way to increase your luck surface area. Going to events, speaking at events and giving good talks is a great way to increase your luck surface area. And going in person to things and, being, showing up on time, doing what you're saying you're going to do, being professional, that's a great way to increase your luck surface area. And if you do all those things, you write niche smart things online, you try to be value add, you have this history of reaching, then you just, the opportunities flourish.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful quote. Increase your luck surface area.
So you can't force yourself to be lucky, but you can increase your luck surface area.
Very, very powerful quote. Awesome. This was super, super insightful. I had a lot of fun. I have a last question for you, which I ask all my guests. It's a tricky one. If you were in the shoes of Kushal Lodha and if you were interviewing Edwin Dorsey, what is one question you'd like to ask him towards the end of the interview?
I think I know the question I'd ask. I'm just trying to think of the answer. The question I would ask is, what do you see as the long-term life vision? What do you want your life to look at 10 years from now and end of life? What is the, impact you want to have? Now answering that
Yeah.
is a little bit tougher. So, a lot of people say, do you want to start a hedge fund one day? When I was really young, I was insistent that I wanted to be a hedge fund manager. That was like the end all be all. And as I've gotten a little older, I come to the view that I don't think the world needs another hedge fund manager. If, even if you could do it successfully, it's a lot of fun. If you want to maximize your earnings in life, you launch a hedge fund. But I really hope I can be somebody that has a big, big impact kind of in consumer protection, fighting for the little guy, and more of like a societal impact and how companies interface with customers. And, I hate what I perceive as bullies or mistreatment. And I just read these complaints people file where, I like read one complaint against a life insurance company, and a woman was, weeks away from dying with a terminal illness. And she was fighting with this company every day just so that her life insurance payout could go to her son. And the company said, we can't find the policy in this. And it was just, and it's terrible how people are treated by large corporations. So something to, change the accountability framework and change the ways that consumers are treated by companies in the long term. That is kind of a lifelong vision of mine. And the newsletter, software tools, and whatever comes next, whether it's more media or investigative journalism or videos, I don't know. But that's kind of the long-term vision I have with, what I want to do with my life.
Yeah, and that's a very powerful vision to have, and I think it serves a noble cause as well. Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. It was super, super fun talking to you, and wish you the best for all your financial softwares that you're going to launch and even for your newsletter as well.
I wish you the best too. Thank you. This has been excellent.
Thank you so much.
अगर आपको ये वीडियो पसंद आया होगा तो I'll request you to share it with all your friends and subscribe to our channel so that we can give you more value additive content in the shortest amount of time. हमको ये बताइए कि आपको कौन से kind of guest चाहिए, हमको ये बताइए कि कौन से questions मुझे नहीं पूछने चाहिए थे, कौन से questions मुझे और पूछने चाहिए थे ताकि आपको और ज़्यादा value मिल सके, और कौन से ऐसे parts हैं जो आपको बिल्कुल पसंद नहीं आए ताकि हम लोग ये parts trim कर सके future episodes में. So thank you so much once again for watching this episode, and keep sharing all our episodes with your friends and keep giving us feedback so that we can improve and come up with better quality content.